Okay. Good evening, everyone. It's lovely to see you all here tonight. It's just wonderful, in fact. And it's our 41st anniversary of the Jung Society in Canberra. And we have a delicious cake to celebrate. So I haven't forgotten. Good evening. Thank you. Welcome. People have come from a long distance away, including our speaker. And Dorothy has come all the way by taxi to be here tonight. What a feat. I'm Jean James, the president of the Canberra Jung Society. Thank you for joining us again here at MacKillop House and online. Let us first acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land and pay our respects to the elders, past, present, and emerging. This evening, we're delighted to welcome back our friend, Dr. Craig St. Roque. Craig was a guest speaker at the Canberra Jung Society in March last year on the subject Stillness, Turbulence and Pressure, a personal story from Central Australia. Tonight, Craig will take up 5 themes close to Glenda's heart: intuition and the soul's intent, participation, mystique, and the voice of women, keeping secrets or the mantle of silence, gathering threads or the knot of iris, contemporary manifestations of the mysteries. Dr. Craig St. Roque maintains a psychological practice in diverse settings and has a number of published works. On our website are some references, links that you can follow up. If you're here on Zoom, please remain muted while Craig is speaking. Use Zoom chat for comments and we'll open up later for discussion. Following Craig's presentation, we'll have a short break for supper and resume for discussion and questions, finishing by 10 p.m. Note that we'll be recording this event for later reference. Thank you, Craig. Lovely to have you here tonight.
You'll be sorry. Okay, let's see. Is the sound right? Now, I'm going to take this fairly slowly and might have to go back every now and then, pick up a theme, because it's not a straight, easy, developmental, certainly not academic story. And it's retrospective. And as I'm looking back, to 1988, well, some of you might remember. And then I'm looking back to some of the early days in Canberra with the change agency, with Temenos, Glenda's practice, shared in the backyard, the emergence of the chorus of women's work, epic event at the time of the Iraq, well, whatever that was about, Mr. Howard, and then events after that, up to the present. And I say looking back because nearly every single person that I recognise or know in this room has been a part of this story I want to tell. And you will have your own experience of that development, including good friends from Wollongong who will remember your participation in some of the events in which Glenda was involved. And that period from about 89, 90, 91, 92 might, if you went back to Joseph Campbell and his 9 stages of development, that would have been a kind of initiation period for many people, beginning with Glenda and her friends from here and my friends from Sydney and strange filmmakers, David Roberts and others who began to take part in so-called workshops, mostly camps, out bush in 3 different locations and also in Wollongong, trying to get to grips with our ancient lineage, mythological, historical culture. So at the time, we'll call it that initiatory period. Some Jungians like that term, initiation. Then there was a period of development in which Glenda and her friends and colleagues and Eumenides there took part. But we're now in the stage where some of us are falling off the perches. So it's a retrospective for us. There's a few younger, rather clever people in here too who've taken up similar themes to the therapy or performance or cultural development. I wish you all the best. And there might be a few clues to pick up from what I need to say. That was the beginning. Now, that bird that you can hear is Glenda's friend, just letting me know that I can keep going. Thank you. You hear it, don't you? What's she saying? Yeah, that's okay. If you hear a crow beginning, things might change. I guess if there's people on Zoom, you probably couldn't hear that bird, but there was a sweet little bird muttering to us, saying, keep going, keep going. Now there's a line from Ovid, Metamorphosis, which was of particular value, a valuable line to Glenda and to me and to others. It's the introduction, or actually it's the invocation that Ovid makes at the beginning of Metamorphosis. There are variations, but this is the one I currently like. Ovid says, changes of shape, new forms. New forms are the theme which my spirit impels me now to recite. Inspire me, O beloved divinities. It is you who have transformed my way and my art. And it was you who spun me a thread from the world's beginning down to my own lifetime in one continuous thread. Taking up the thread, what I have to say is not particularly and specifically about Glenda Cloughley. It's about the web of persons who in one way or another have taken part or participated in contexts of which Glenda and Glenda's life was a part. And that is the best we can all say for each other. I was a part of something that was also a threat right down to the beginning of our times. Now, there are cultural deep songs upon which many of us have drawn, which have given guidance and form and evocative measure to the works of Glenda and to the works of others here, and to the chorus, and to Miriam in our work with Persephone, the 3 performances in Alice Springs and subsequently in Santorini, and the people associated with Thomas Singer and the ancient Greek modern psyche events, which now are 3 in Santorini, and there are 3 books, and I'm going to quote from one of those later. So this web is not only a group of 30 or 40 people who you might immediately see here, but it extends to San Francisco, Portland, Oregon, Bulgaria. Actually, hardly anybody in the United Kingdom has any interest in what we do here. A few people in South Africa that I know of who came here and also studied with John Cameron and David Russell, and some of you here. So there is a wider web. But this cultural deep song fairly specifically began to orient itself around the Mediterranean, Aegean, Bulgaria, to what was called Thrace, across into older Europe, primarily a little touch of Hungary. Mostly, though, that section of the world seems to have been calling to the people who were involved and continue to be involved. And, might I say, a little call from the Black Sea, which Anna Hunico will recall when she presented her works there. And, of course, the Ukraine. I will not mention the Russians. But also these threads were extended. Isis and Osiris and Inanna, Eshtanana, particularly through the visit originally to Canberra and elsewhere of Diana Volkstein, who some of you may recall, who came and recited and brought her knowledge and understanding from New York. She's from New York, but actually a deep investigation into the myth of Inanna from Sumeria. And I think she inspired Glenda, particularly at the beginning of their meetings together. And some of us have also, and there are 2 or 3 in this room, who have extended our understanding of the deep song, the thread of the deep song, to engagement with Walkyrie, Pinderby in particular, some of whom you remember, David, coming to Wollongong with Leon Pechkovsky, visiting you, and some who went from University of Western Sydney to Mimili in the Pitjantjatjara land in 88, 89, 90, and brought up extraordinary combination of performance from the Nepean Performing College, and then to young men and older men and younger women and older women in Mimili, which really began, so far as I'm concerned, the relationship between a group of the, we'll call it the Jungian analytic people, and engaging with Pitjantjatjara people back in 88, 89, 90, which began a whole series of events which are not my theme for tonight, but I'm acknowledging this is how this web has extended. And Glenda herself spent, I think, 6 months doing her psychiatric placement in Alice Springs Hospital. And there she came to know Andrew Jackal Spencer and Marlene Ambajimpa and helped translate with her certain stories that I was involved in around the theme of Dionysus and intoxication and dismemberment and destruction. Now, there are many variations in this story if I was to go into them, but I just want to keep slowly, after having spread the net, to a few threads. And as we go today, I want to emphasize what I already have begun, is this notion of participation. Now, the term that Jung used and drew from Lévi-Bruhl, the anthropologist, is this term participation in French, participation mystique. And what this is a reference to, I would like to say now, because this is really my thing. Participation, or the French participation, has to do with being gathered together and taking part in something. The word mystique in the French is related to the word mystic, but actually it's not really about the mystical. The mystique was drawn from the Greek term, which means to close one's eyes or to close one's lips. And this has two meanings for me tonight. One is we're dealing with an internal participation. There are many forms of so-called external participation, and one of them is football, when the crowd feels as one when the team wins or loses. This is an extraordinary manifestation of participation, human participation, passion. But it's not quite the same as this other sense, which I think Glenda herself was experiencing and developing the best she could in her participation with the chorus of women's work. Of course, there are external, as it were, manifestations in the performances of the chorus in very specific locations. But the key to it was the quietness and the closing of the mouth or the closing of the eyes in participation with each other. You might want to comment on that a little later if you so wish. This participation mystique that I'm referring to is about devotion to generative, creative forms of beauty. Now, people say also that practice of psychotherapy can be a form of participation mystique. And I would say that's true, and that's been my experience. But participation mystique, in the way I'm thinking of it with Glenda, is not only within the frame of the psychotherapeutic quietness, silence, not speaking about what happens there. That's a form of beauty and terror. But I'm speaking more about the collaborations that have occurred in the world, particularly through the works of some of you here. But the anchor for Glenda's work and for others who participated has been this quietness, silence, internal mystique participation, an intimate process internally. But what it's also involved has meant the acknowledging of ancestors and cultures past, present, and emerging in oneself. So this acknowledgement that's given at the beginning of sessions now, acknowledging ancestors past, present, and future. Many of you here have been participating in such an acknowledgement of culture past, present, and emerging for 50, 60 years in diverse ways. Glenda was one of those. Now, because I've begun, and I'm already into it, I have to acknowledge one paragraph of Jung's. I'm not going to look it up in my book. You can find it. It's actually in Memories, Dreams and Reflections. I think I've got the reference. But in that, he addresses this question, which is actually a kind of razor-sharp question for many Jungian and Freudian practitioners. And the notion is that the practice of psychotherapy is concerned only with the individual or with individuation. And for a long period of time, this was the ethic to which one had to work. But if you see what Jung says, in several variations, he says it is not always correct to consider that the person should be the aim or the front line of the practice of psychotherapy, because every person is involved in mankind. Every person, that's a quote from Demeter, every person is involved in collective, social, unconscious and conscious processes. And no analyst, this is me using his words, no analyst worth their salt will ignore the effect of the collective, social, cultural impact upon the individual. And those of you who have lived through European and other countries' disasters of the last 40 to 50 to 60 years, and there are quite a few in this room, you will know that that which has affected you and your family in those situations continues to have impact today. But the focus of the work ethically cannot be only the individual. Now, I'm saying this rather firmly because I recall through Glenda's process in her training in Anscha and my own negotiations and that of others, this conflict between that which is meant to be individual and that which is in fact collective and cultural. This conflict is only just now being managed and resolved in a reasonable way. Thank God, some people have been working at it, and that includes Andrew Samuels in the UK. The UK is good for a few things, and that includes Tom Singer and his group dealing with the cultural complex, and some of us who've written to and worked in that field. But why I'm saying this is that Glenda was onto this theme very early in her career. It caused her trouble. But she took it up with the Temenos group, with the Change Agency group, and with you in the chorus. Out on autumn, actually. Now I want to go to these 5 points that Jean very kindly read out to remind me what I was supposed to be doing. The first is this theme of intuition. This theme of intuition I don't want to develop now, but it's directly related to this notion of participation mystique, which means, if you look at the word intuition, the original means in and tutor from tutor or tuition. It's a very old word, Greek and Latin, and it refers to developing a relationship with an internal teacher or tutor. And as you develop a relation with an internal teacher or tutor, who is probably some quiet little bird singing in yourself, then your intuition, your intuitive abilities develop. Now, some people have feeling for intuition as a natural part of their early life or their character, and some have to work at it. But I just want to announce that those of you who think very strongly may have difficulty thinking and feeling or thinking and intuiting, but gradually, with a balance, can be worked to, where intuition and thinking and feeling and the somatic capacities become combined and fairly nicely operating. And one way to do that, last sentence, is to participate with other people in group events, those wild events sometimes that you might recall in our Dionysian and events, 3 or 4 workshops in the country, down by Jarvis Bay, up above there, Berry and so on. And the purpose of that engagement of a group working together on a very specific theme, a mythical theme, is, as I look back, actually the way by which those of intuition could combine with those with feeling, with somatic capacity and thinking capacity as a group, because no single person could do it alone. In my opinion, Glenda was onto that too. And she was helped in that by a dear friend of hers and mine, who's now gone back to Northern Ireland, called Jerry Maria Slevin, who actually came here as a refugee from the Northern Ireland conflicts. I can't give you the details of that because she was close to assassination at one point. But her capacity to assist Glenda for a period in bringing together seriously traumatic events from Northern Ireland with Glenda's capacity for compassion was, I think, one of the events which helped form her capacity across, to take the courage, to work together with you, the chorus, and others, whereas at the same time maintaining her individual position. That's another big story, but it has to do with participative intuition. Someone should write that down. Now, the second one takes us to Eleusis. Now, Eleusis, over 2,000 years, was the site of the Eleusinian Mysteries. The site is still there. Miriam and I and Fiona Walsh have been there together when we were on our way to give a performance, Persephone. The site is still there. I want to say something about that site. But for 2,000 years, people would walk once a year, if I recall correctly, or then the big one every 4 years, from Athens, 30 kilometres along the coast to the site of Eleusis or Eleusis. And there were particular, what we would call here, sacred sites, where the mysteries, so-called, the ceremonies, were carried out. And everyone who attended was sworn to secrecy. You add that up. According to what people like Malonus and others can get to, there was usually 2, 3, 4, maybe more, 1,000 people at the major mysteries for 2,000 years, and nobody, as far as anybody knows, really told the secret. Now, Aeschylus was accused of telling the secret, revealing it, in his 3 plays that Glenda and Eumenides did together. And a few others were accused of it. Euripides was part of it, Sophocles was part of it, Plato was part of it, few others, and even those smarty-pants men didn't give away the secrets of what they participated in. What I reckon is the secret was actually the participation process of so many people coming together and witnessing the drama of Persephone and Demeter, and something else happening there, illuminations, revelations, but it was together in a group with dancing and singing and the whole shemaz, but they didn't go home and tell everybody what it was all about. They maintained the secret. You've got to think about this somehow as to what this secret was. And I'm saying to you, one of the elements, repeating, was this extraordinary capacity to participate in something together and yet remain lips closed. I see that also related to the practice of psychotherapy, where an extraordinary number of people, including those here, have participated in that mystery and yet don't really talk about it much. And certainly this notion of confidentiality is maintained. And I'm sure that's one of the reasons why it's usually, for some people, effective. That's another story for, the answer analytic seminar or something. Number 4. One of the main themes that I've witnessed in Glenda's and her friends' lives here and elsewhere is their capacity to gather threads. Now, the term you use in the chorus is about the web and the web song, with some reference to the thread of Isis. But the most important thing is not this silent, passive kind of keeping secret and having a nice time together. It's actually extraordinary capacity that the chorus and others have maintained over years now, since 2003, wasn't it? The gathering of threads between people. And by that I mean not just the gathering of individual relations, I mean the threads to do with terrible and difficult things that are going on across the world. You've addressed it, and you'll address it again tomorrow. Now, the 5th theme, and that's the one I want to concentrate on, is this notion of the contemporary manifestation of the mysteries. Now, I don't pretend to know really how to phrase this or how to address it, but I think a few things I'm going to suggest to you might give you something to get off distance, to start developing. Now, I'm going to approach this one like this. Geography. The site of Eleusis has very specific geography. There are many sites in Australia which have very specific geographical locations and forms. The main, I'm not going to talk about Indigenous sites. That would be in another situation with other people present. At Eleusis, there is a cave. This has been attributed or called Hades Cave, Eidos Cave. This is allegedly, when you go there, or is located, is said in the story that's told about the place. That cave there is where Hades is. And that hole in the ground in front of it, a deep, deep hole, that is said to be where Persephone went down. You might remember that. Now, there's another hole, which is a well. It's called the Maiden's Well. And some people say, no, she didn't go down that hole. That was for something else. She went down the well, a maiden's well. It's a nicer place, by the way, and you can go down and come back. Who knows? But the point is, cave and two quite distinct shafts, pits. Then there's a meeting area, a ceremony ground. It was actually constructed eventually into a very big building that could hold a couple of thousand people, and it's now a ruin. Several, attacks, burnt down. But you can see where the land was spread out for the ceremony site, where the illuminations were conducted, where the performances were conducted. So cave, pits, well, meeting area, a 30-kilometre procession from Athens to the place and then back again, a stop on the way at several bridges, so bridges, at least 2, maybe 3, people, and a place where you go into the water and there's a kind of lot of little pigs who unfortunately have to be cooked and eaten as part of it. A bridge where some old woman shouts obscenities at you as you pass by. What's her name? Bobo something. And she's a really nasty bitch. And as you pass, that's what you cop as you go. Never mind all the pretty things and flowers being thrown on you. And in the performances, these are the main characters. The mother, Demeter, who's responsible for the maintenance of, in a sense, the forces of nature, the growing of things. Her daughter, Persephone, who's also responsible for the growing and the nurturing and the regeneration of things, even though she ends up down in Hades' place. And I should have brought slides to show you our version of it when poor old Persephone goes down into the dark and gets into a lot of interesting relationships with someone who becomes her husband, Hades, and eventually she becomes pregnant and has a baby and maybe a girl. And then there's this character called Bromeo and other names, Iarchos, who's a young man who seems to be the son of Demeter or Persephone. But that's all I want to say at that point, the characters. And then there's a kind of director, sometimes referred to as the Hierophant and the priest and the priestess, but they direct the whole show. Seems to me that with those elements, some of you have participated in some of the events that we also rather blindly started to develop, trying to understand how these old myths work. The Dionysus one, the Orpheus one, the Oedipus one, the Inanna one. We've done quite a lot of them, actually. But nearly all of those have had those same elements. A cave, you remember that, the grandmother's cave, a pit, a seaside, a meeting area, food, not exactly processions, but there were certainly a few bitches who shouted at us, and there were characters that were the characters involved in that particular story. Dionysus, his grandfather, his grandmother, and so on, Demeter, Persephone. I don't want to go into all that. But then some kind of illuminative, difficult, confused, sometimes nighttime events took place. Glenda witnessed many of these. She was part of many of them. And somehow it had an effect. Now, it seems to me you don't have to go back to Eleusis 2,500 years ago. Human beings have the imagination and the capacity to reform, reinvent, and continue the long line. Some do it in performance ways like that. Some do it with music, with groups, and some with lots of double basses. One day you'll all hear Hunika's fire songs. I'm going to finish up soonish. just to remind one more thing, is that nearly all of those events which Glenda took part in, and ones I'm thinking of, many of those had a kind of not secrecy about them, but we didn't talk about them much. Whereas the chorus events, which I think are still part of the participating mystique attitude, these had to be public events. And that's why the inspiration for those events has been Aeschylus, Euripides, Sophocles, and other theatrical works, guided sometimes by people experienced in the theatre, Elizabeth Dowman and others, because these are not so much mysteries with the eyes closed, internal activities, but these are for comment, therapeutically, hopefully, comment upon the condition of the collective or the social world of our cities. The two go together. Now, I didn't want to have a PowerPoint. I just wanted to do this, but I should have had a blackboard. Because what I did was to do one of those maps. And I'd like to suggest that each person who wishes to, who's been involved in some of the events that I'm been describing, might want to do one for yourself. But I've done one where I was between 89 and the present. Well, not quite the present. I'm not doing these events anymore. I stagger too much and will fall in the fire. But my map has certain points. The University of Western Sydney conferences 88 to 90, which were, I don't think anyone here took part in, but some of the people who were part of the original development of the Jungian training were part of those conferences. At one of those conferences, with my two daughters and Glenda and Amanda Dowd, I'm not sure if you were there in that, but we did a performance of Oedipus at an Aboriginal cultural, political conference. We did it in the forum, in a big sort of not amphitheatre, but an atrium, right in the middle, so that as it was developing, and we had how many tons of sand on the ground and God knows what else, and we performed Oedipus for the multicultural group. That was a very interesting experience. Glenda's Oedipus theme, I think, not exactly began with that, but I think that led, if you're looking at the map, you'll see soon after she begins her Oedipus thesis. But she reinterprets Oedipus quite differently to the way many of the Jungian and the political people and Freud were interpreting Oedipus. At the same time, more or less, a group of the people from Mimili, Aboriginal ceremony people, came to the Blue Mountains, and many of the people who then became part of the Jungian group took part and learned some of those dances in the Blue Mountains and then elsewhere with the Pitjantjatjara men. And that was really where Leon Petchkovsky and I began to develop our association with that part of the country. Social ecology was another gathering place. University, what became University of Western Sydney, Hawkesbury. Some of you might have been associated with that. And that led to the Jungian Masters in Cultural Psychology or Analytical Psychology, which Glenda took part in and others here took part in, including Dorothea. And you can see there's a thread there that's been held by John Cameron, by David Russell, and others of their colleagues, and still do. Ross White. At the time, you don't know what's happening, and then you look back and you say, thank God that happened. You were there. They made you into a scholar, nearly a doctor. Then I mentioned the Dionysian development, which was a theme I was working on and others were working on, those camps we had. Glenda took part in that. She didn't develop the Dionysus, thank God, because it's all about dismemberment and bad things happening. She didn't follow that line. What she did was cross over to the Oedipus and then began the connection to the gifts of the Furies, and what then went from the flood investigations, Christina Biaggi and her enthusiasm for nets, to Bulgaria. You went to Bulgaria. Gimbutas, Dorothy Cameron, the music and the development of the recognition of the women's elements of old Europe. That's the way I see it. That was not an easy exploration, but it was essential. And you participated in that. And that has led, whereas in a sense I went a different way, and I don't talk about mine so much, but we picked up intercultural relations, not European ones, but more Australian-linked ones, with the Persephone stories and my own version of Aeschylus, Electra, actually, which we not really performed. But in the middle of this, visits to the Aegean, to Delphi, to Eleusis, to Santorini and other places in order to go to the actual sites, just like you and Glenda went to the sites of many of those old cultural locations. You didn't sit at home reading books in the library. And you went back to certain places in Hungary. Now, it seems to me that all of this begins to make sense, when you look back, however many years that was, of how threads were kept going. And some people insisted on keeping that links together. Glenda was one of them, and her family, and others who were working with her. This is another aspect, that's all I want to say, another aspect of therapeutic work for oneself within a cultural context. I've almost finished. Now, what I was addressing then was this idea that the secret of these mysteries is not something way back in the past. It's quite possible for human beings, even in this country, to participate or find or reform or reinvent themes from our cultural history. And that includes the Hebrew Jewish histories, and that includes the Hungarian and the Bulgarian and the Eastern Europe histories, and that includes the Mediterranean, East Coast, Lebanese, Israel, all the way down the coast, Egypt. It's still possible, Sumeria, and which is currently in sort of Iraq. And one of my close friends is a doctor who performed actually at the Alice Springs Writers' Festival, one section of the my Electra theme. She had done that after having just returned from working for a year in the Médecins Sans Frontières in Mosul during the period, that really nasty period when the ISIS was operating. End of story. The way we think about these old mysteries, no matter which one I want to worry about, they're not necessarily in the past. There's a re-evocation that can take place and does take place. And sometimes it happens whether you want to or not. And that's why I began this with the acknowledgement of Ovid, where he says to the beloved divinities, help me to spin a thread from the beginning of all things right down to my present time. It seems to me that still happens through inspiration, intuition, and just good, hard work on whatever one's theme happens to be. And that, folks, is where I think I'll leave us at this point.
Thank you very much. Might have us thinking about a lot of different things. Yes. But now it's time to have a cup of tea and you have a drink in here.
Thanks, Craig. I really enjoyed what you had to say.
Can you hear that? Okay.
My mum was good friends with Diane Walkstein when she visited Canberra. And so that whole heritage, I suppose, of matrifocal European culture is a really deep tradition.
Yeah.
And it's got this union of the sacred and the secret.
And the secret. Yeah.
And I'm just wondering if you could perhaps comment on how the trauma of our world is connected to the loss of that connection between the sacred and the secret.
That's a really good. I don't know whether Zoom picked that up, but this. Okay, so you've put together sacred, secret, women's affairs, and trauma. What I didn't read out to you tonight, I'm not going to want to get it tonight. There is an article by Richard Transdall, who's in San Francisco, actually. We met him in Santorini. And he was a theatre director as well as a Jungian analyst. And he, in his article, he's talking about the Aeschylus Eumenides trilogy. And his take on it is a really good answer or response to what we were saying. And he shows how in those three theatre works by Aeschylus, which Glenda and Chorus drew upon for the gift of the Furies, he traces through that the repetition of family trauma. The original family, Agamemnon, and the traumatic events for those three women, Iphigenia, who was sacrificed for the men of war, Electra, who was kind of pushed aside, and who later participated in the killing of her mother and her mother's lover. And she is affected by what happens to her father, Agamemnon, and so it goes, the three intense trauma stories. Told not as case histories by a psychoanalyst, but as a dramatist at that time. And as it weaves its way through, which is what I think Glenda picked up, is that the chorus of women gradually assume much more the voice of the women who have been injured, and the father, and the men, and Troy, and all the battles that took place before, Fall of Troy, and Heron, and the woman captured from them and brought back, who foresees everything that's about to happen, but isn't Cassandra if no one believes what she says, we shall listen. So you could see, I don't want to talk much more than that, but you could just see in that theatre work that was chosen by you and by Glenda, it really carries that theme through until at the end, there is a kind of, not really a therapeutic event, but the Furies become the Eumenides. It ceased to be these harassing, persecutory old ladies who live in a cave and no one listens to them. And then, with Athena's intervention, gifts of the Furies, they become acknowledged again as well in the story, as part of Athens. And Aeschylus worked so hard in that drama against, as far as I can see, the current of the time, in order to bring the Furies, the Eumenides, into recognition again. I think that's all I can say.
As a sacred secret.
Well, my understanding of the use of that term secret sacred or sacred secret actually has been developed in relation to Indigenous culture. And there are very good reasons why women's affairs and women's relationship and the sexual biological aspects of human beings, male and female, are in some cultures kept sacred and secret. The word sacred, I think, gives attention, because it isn't holy Jesus up in the sky, O Mother of Mary, God, pure, but it's actually that which can be spoken about, but only with the appropriate people and within specific relationships. Now, I don't want to make a link from Indigenous Australia to ancient Greek, but it seems to me that the aspects of the mysteries of Eleusis deal with very particular women's relationship, mother-daughter and son, and they make us into quite complex but also intimate matters. And it's not for me to speak about it. But your theme is worth talking about quietly and gently outside a public domain. Is that all right? Did I answer that all right?
Yes. Yeah.
That's the best thing I call one, contemporary aspects in Australia that can be spoken about, that which should be kept in particular situations. That's the best I can do.
Roque, you talk about large numbers of people who went on this sort of pilgrimage
Yes.
over a very long period of time, took in some sort of special experience which they held on to as a secret very successfully, apparently. As a therapist, I wonder if you have any experience of the cost for people holding secrets. You know, the other side of this, people who have some mysterious dark part of their background that they really can't talk about except by paying money to a therapist, you know, or who in our present day have security ratings and so forth that require them to be secret about what they're doing. Do you see any evidence in your professional life of that being an issue for people, as opposed to being a pleasure and a sort of part of the human condition, you know, even with little children who love the idea of who start to love the idea of having a secret when they understand what it is?
That's a really good question. There are two aspects I could comment on, and that's really for other people too. The so-called participation mystique is the participation, people joining together knowingly in an event or a process, sacred or whatever, I don't like the word sacred for this, and where there's an understanding that it's an internal process which needs to protection and therefore is you maintain secrecy. The word that's used is more word confidential. You keep what occurs in the meetings, including meetings of the fullness of women, confidential. It's not the business of other people. What is the business of the chorus is when a performance is written and done. That is carried to the public. I would see that as quite a different use of the word confidential and secret to that where a person or a family have been through really awful circumstances or circumstances which have been very destructive, in which if they speak about it, possibly have repercussions, are persecuted, injured, killed. So that's quite a different aspect of this keeping mouths closed. And that's where, as you quite rightly said, that moves into the area of traumatization, consequences of traumatization, therapeutic engagement, destruction, perhaps, of whole family systems sometimes. Then it leads us into things that happen through various wars, persecutions that we know of, where if you speak, you'll be shot or killed. So like that is such a volatile theme which you're introducing. That's as far as I can take it.
There's
It has to be taken up, but it's really beyond saying you know, together.
there's this notion in trauma-informed care of resisting re-traumatization, and I just wondered if there's something about that creating of a new experience, a new connection, without the need for speech, if there's something therapeutic in that from that trauma-informed care perspective.
That's a really good point, Joe. So I just repeat that to some extent. The possibility that in allegedly therapeutic situations, a re-traumatization can come about. And this is a double problem because it's a kind of eruption from the history of the individual, but it's also where two people or six or in a group are trying to handle historical past events, and the group or the other individuals together working find that there's a volcanic eruption, psychological. And this is where therapeutic omnipotence becomes a very dangerous thing. Unfortunately, a lot of the training these days is infused with a kind of, I can fix it, don't you worry. But then we have to take very particular situations in hand, wouldn't we? I'm afraid I see this myself quite a lot in relations to do with Central Australian traumatisation too. But that's not the thing for tonight.
Yeah, thank you.
The approaching it, it can't be in a public situation, in my opinion. Go deeply into that thing, but you really put it on the table.
Thank you.
In your work, in what you see that thing.
I was just going to say, during the break, I was talking to Caroline and I was talking about the Masters of Analytical Psychology at Western City. Remember that?
Yes,
Well, I was
master's degree, not the master's of analytical psychology. which there are none. No,
All right.
you were talking about.
Yes, well, I just remember being, I was explaining that we would do our classes in circles and have these amazing residentials that were 5-day residentials at the beginning of semester where we'd stay on campus, and just how amazing that course was. And I just remember this one, he was quite young. We were at this long table with David Russell, and there was a group of us around, and this boy said, it's like we're all angels at the table of God. He didn't mean David, he meant all of us were angels at the table of God. And that was the image he got. And that kind of describes what it was like doing that masters. You know, it was this, it was just such a wonderful, we were so lucky to go through that course, because, you know, it was just such a special time, the way we would spend those 5 days sitting in circles. And, you know, I'm unsure even what unfolded, but just, you know, so I just, as a small part of the long story you were telling, you know, that was a small section that happened. And I just wanted to say, you know, it was just such a, you know, I mean, sacred, special kind of experience for all of us who went through it. So,
How long, what sort of date was that you're talking about, Sean?
Yeah.
30 years ago?
yeah,
20.
Well,
yeah, 2004 to 8, I was there, I think, or 7.
yes.
Yeah.
Well, I just want to make a point about that. Is that to remind you that evolved at the Masters in Jungian psychology. Dorothy was part of that. Was actually got initiated by David Russell, John Cameron, Brendan Stewart, and others who had come through the social ecology. And social ecology, if you take the word apart, is related to the ecosystem of human beings, the participative, intellectual, emotional, intuitive, and so participation of individuals and groups, the human ecology. The term was social ecology. And of course it was related to the Nepean and the Hawkesbury River and the climate change issues and the ecological issues. But they had that initiative until it was destroyed by the university in favour of another approach, more academic. But they were able to lift the social ecology theme to do exactly what you said, that people could be sitting at a table and a young man could think, we are all angels sitting in the presence of God. No, not necessarily God, but the kind of the recognition of the divinity of human relations in relation with the human and the physical ecosystem. There was a reason, not a reason, there was reasoning in the minds of the men and women, such as Cameron and Russell and others, who made that happen. Then it was destroyed. And we won't talk tonight about how that initiative was destroyed, because it'll get me sued for defamation of a character. But it was part of the conflict that was occurring in analytical psychology at that time around favouring the individual over the collective and the ecological. No, you're right. Well, I'm celebrating, and I'm telling you that it wasn't just God, it was good men and women. It made it possible. Time. It's not much longer.
You go.
Okay, one man after that, please.
As you were speaking, found myself thinking about, in the context of participation together participation together with secrecy, that sometimes things that can be experienced can't adequately be communicated about to people who haven't been part of that experience. So it's not so much about an ethic of confidentiality, but as it is about just the nature of the different experience, whether that's an experience for good or for ill. I'm interested in your comment on that.
No, well, that's I want to go back to Aeschylus, because the effort that he must have had to take to work through those three performances in public and to bring out such a traumatically incest, murder, deception, destruction of the young people, revenge, like every single one of the most intense human relations are packed into that. And yet he found a way, how many thousand years ago, to lay it out towards a reasonable resolution. And that is the master craftsman. And few of us have that ability to do that, either privately or building. And I think that's partly why or how Glenda felt encouraged enough to try to work through that media, bring those things to a public, if you will.
Which had its own agony.
It
Had its own agony.
And, you know, what a good thing you've introduced.
All I wanted to do is just to,
Bit closer to you now.
All I wanted to do was just acknowledge your mention of a deep song. That's all.
Trying to hold on. When I began, I mentioned deep song. Remember, in the English sense of songs that go, as it were, back to the beginning of things, that are able musically and in the human voice, but also in the themes, as it were, of the passion and the emotion, deep emotion. And it's Garcia Lorca, who some of you may know of, who wrote about Cloughley, particular form of flamenco relationship, because he was before flamenco. But he writes about Cloughley, deep song, and that was also a musical form, along with the Rembetica, the Greek Rembetica, that was part of the background of the law. Deep song, going back many cultures to the origin, creation. And I hear it at Peterby, and I hear it in Roque, I hear it in talking languages in the Jumawah story, in many other countries. You take a deep song down into creation.
And maybe from some of the expressions coming from the chorus of women.
And from the chorus of women
Mm.
in our own times.
Good note to finish on.
Peter, any comment on to make?
Well, I have a memory of Glenda that you very present. But I don't know if I can do it justice. Does this? With her, and I was trying to jog her memory about something that had happened in a bit of a creative context, or something like this. This is why I wasn't sure to share, but I will. I'm committed, so I'm going there. And she just started talking to me about
which I didn't understand 3/4 of it in many ways, the transference experience. But this thing about when something happens, when something occurs in an alchemic vessel, it can't be, it's really hard to recall and then to explain again. And we had a long conversation about it, and this is all that can come out of me right now. But it's totally this thing of hand over the mouth and the eyes, and when things happen in an alchemic vessel, yeah, like it's exactly what you're talking about, Sue, that they don't have words, and the only option you have is to use your body or your instrument of expression to, yeah, in that way. So that's all I have to offer.
I want to finish now, but I want to acknowledge Fabio. Fabio is a concreter in Alice Springs. Fabio Bonanni. The Bonanni brothers were immigrants from Italy. They came to Alice Springs after the Second World War, and they began making concrete from the sand in the riverbed, in the top of the bed, and started to build many of the houses. They were responsible for 2 of the houses that Jude and I lived in Alice Springs, built by the Bonanni brothers. I went for a walk with Fabio, he's a neighbour, and he showed me through the old east side the houses that the Bonannis had built. Beautifully. Simple, old Italian, how do you call that? One story, simple houses, like you see in the village. I said, Fab, you see that up there, that particular cornice your father did? How did he do it? Trade secret, mate. Trade secret. It takes years of apprenticeship to the Bonanni brothers to know how to mix the concrete bricks from the sand in the Todd River to make them last 100. And Bonanni says, these houses are going to last 200 or more years. Now, I think Glenda and others have trade secrets, and they had to do with this intimate business between people in that so-called vessel that you're talking about. But last sentence, it's not always the person, the therapist or whatever the Glenda was, knows what to say, because quite often when the moment is finished, it's forgotten. You have no idea what happened. Bonanni knows how to do it because he's worked at it, and his father worked at it, and his father before him, and his father up in northern Italy, where they were part of the resistance movement during the war. And they never talk about what happened then either. I noticed when I asked Bonanni about what his father did in the war. Oh, I don't think I know.